Welcome to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and director of The Sales Doctor, and I'm joined today by our guest, Trudy MacDonald, who is the founder and director of Talent Code HR. Welcome, Trudy.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure's all mine, I have to say. Wow, I've been so looking forward to today's conversation. So just by way of introduction for our listeners, Trudy is as I said before, the founder and director of Talent Code HR for the last 12 years. But not only that, she is also a multiple award-winning keynote speaker and presenter. And what you might not know as a listener is, in the different circles that I'm a part of, Trudy's work from even 10 years ago is still being referenced and used as relevant today because she's so highly regarded. So welcome again, Trudy.
Thank you, Ingrid, and it's very humbling to hear that, I must say.
So, look, tell us a little bit about Talent Code HR and the important work that you've done with organisations globally.
Thank you, Ingrid. So Talent Code HR specialises in working with organisations of all sizes to create high-performance cultures and high-performance organisations. And I think what's really interesting to me and my team is how much the role of leadership has evolved and changed over recent years with that outcome in mind. How do we continue to engage our people? How do we drive accountability, and how do we do that in a way that really reflects not only the changing needs of the talent market, but what we need to be doing to be successful as leaders in organisations?
Wow, okay. So what are some of those changes?
Yeah, look, it's fascinating to have watched the changes, and the reality is COVID changed the world in so many ways. But I think for me that was a real impetus for significant change. Okay. What happened during COVID is it changed our mindsets. So if I look at this from a work perspective, for so many of us, we started to realise that there's more to life than just work. Many people were just on the treadmill and going through the motions. We started to recognise that we want balance in our lives. We want flexibility. We want to pursue other things other than just work. And that not only changed individuals' expectations of their experience when they were engaged with an organisation, but as leaders, it put a whole lot of pressure on us because now we had to truly lead and manage the whole person, not just the person who showed up to work. And that's been particularly challenging for a lot of people. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of leaders that we need to adopt a more empathetic approach to leadership. But one of the biggest challenges that I've seen and one of the biggest shifts is in some cases leaders have gone too far towards that empathetic approach. So getting the balance right between empathy and accountability is probably one of the biggest things that we're focused on with organisations at the moment.
I love you. Love the way that you, and all of this I can imagine is research driven, either formally or informally too, through the work that you do. So I just want to come back to a couple of things that you said there, which I think are absolutely so important for us to understand in the current context to identify what we need to be doing going forward. So leading and managing the whole person, not just the person that comes to work, because, I think that started when we were all on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and, children would be in the background and cats would be, walking in front of the camera and, and we started to be a little bit more casualised, in our appearance because we realised that it was actually us showing up to work, not the facade or the work persona.
Yes.
But I really appreciate the fact that, that leaders perhaps aren't equipped to do that. And so, like a pendulum, we've tended, for if what I'm hearing is right, to go too far towards the empathetic. So what's the next adjustment that they need to make in order to do leadership a lot more effectively, given that we still need to lead and manage the whole person, Trudy.
Yeah, it's getting the balance right, and easier said than done. So maybe if I can give you a few examples of what I mean by shifting too far towards empathy. As we know, flexibility used to be a point of differentiation for organisations.
Yes.
In the current environment, it's an absolute expectation. And it's interesting if you look at the data around the percentage of jobs that are advertised on LinkedIn, which is a well-known platform, and the percentage of applicants who are applying for those jobs, it's something along the lines of, and I haven't quite got this completely accurate, but something along the lines of 30% of jobs that are advertised are completely remote jobs. However, 60% of applications are being funneled into those 30% of jobs. So that's telling us there's been quite a profound shift in terms of people's expectations around working from home, working remotely, and being able to integrate life into their work. However, for many organisations, there's actually a real push to get people back into the physical workplace because we lose so much when it comes to culture and development and engagement if we're not actually together. So some of the areas where I've seen it shift a little too far, and I'll share a quick story with you. There was an individual in a sales role who was working in a hybrid environment, and he got a new puppy. Fantastic. He was scheduled to come into the workplace for a meeting because it was the normal weekly meeting, and he called the manager and said, look, I've got this new puppy. I actually can't leave it at home. It requires my care. Do you mind if I just conference in for the sales meeting? Now, the manager actually did the right thing. He put himself in the shoes of the person and thought, okay, if I were that person, that would be a reasonable request, and he granted that request, and that was fine. They had a hybrid meeting. But then what happened is a few weeks later, there was a sales conference that was scheduled, multiple days, on site, major sales conference, flying people in from all over the country. The phone call came into the manager to say, you know what, the puppy still can't survive on its own. I need to be here. I'm not sure that I can make the conference. Now, at that point, you can understand the manager's has a bit of a dilemma. What do I do about this? Do I be empathetic? I don't want to lose this person. Do I put down my foot and draw a hard line? Well, that's probably not going to work either. So he ended up conceding and allowed the individual to attend the conference virtually. Not ideal. But you know where this is going, right? So a few weeks later, what then happened is the salesperson called and said, you know what, I know my job involves traveling around the country and visiting customers. I think I can do this remotely. This is how I'm going to work from now on. And that's when my team gets a phone call to go, hang on, where is the line here? And it's really, really tricky, and it's really, really grey. So I think the thing that I've observed over the last few years is, because of the state of the talent market, particularly, it's been hard to attract good quality talent. It's been hard to retain talent. We're fearful of losing talent. Many managers have avoided having accountability conversations because they don't want to lose people. And they're thinking, which is the worst outcome here? However, in doing that, what's happened is we've created a new expectation amongst the workforce, that it's more centred towards the employee, that it's more about me and what works for me. And we've forgotten about our accountability to the organisation and the accountability to our teams as well.
Again, so much there. So it's almost like we've created a behaviour, if we were parents, you know, we've created these teenagers who, I don't want to use the word entitled, but for want of a better phrase, who are entitled, and trying to rein that back in is a real challenge. So what do leaders need to do in order to be empathetic to this new normal that we're in, where flexibility is not a differentiator, it's an expectation?
Yes.
And to manage the performance of their organisation while also trying to retain great people.
Yeah. So there's a few key areas here, and when I started to identify that this was a problem, and another emerging problem, just to put it out there to complicate the landscape a little more, is that most of us are feeling burnt out and exhausted. So in the media, there's been some big buzzwords that have emerged over the last few years: the Great Resignation, the not so great resignation, quiet quitting. Where we are right now today has been dubbed the Great Exhaustion. And currently in the Australian market, 60% of the workforce is claiming that they've experienced some level of burnout over the last 12 months, compared to 48% globally as a global average. So Australia's topping the charts, not in a good way, but we add that to the broader context as well, and it's particularly challenging for leaders. So in the research I've done in this area, I've really focused on trying to get to the root cause of what was going on here. And the first thing I acknowledged is that so many organisations have very generously supported their employees, and we've all seen it. There's been yoga classes and free massages and extra days off and flexi leave. There's been so much support, or empathy, if I can call it that. What's fascinating is, despite all of that, burnout numbers continue to rise. So the first thing to recognise is that you can't yoga your way out of burnout. Not that I'm undermining the importance of those things, because they're absolutely critical, but there's not a direct causal relationship. So then I dug a little further. I thought, okay, there's got to be something going on here. And there's a few things. One is lack of role clarity. And specifically what I've observed is a lot of individuals are experiencing what I refer to as role compression. So what does this mean? It means that I'm doing parts of other people's jobs and I'm being sucked down into lower value tasks and responsibilities than I'm actually being paid to do. Whereas in an ideal high performance organisation, our roles are actually elevating, they're not being compressed. And that's occurred as a result of moving through the post-pandemic period where we've had talent shortages. Everyone's rolled up their sleeves with good intention. We've got the job done. However, we've created new habits and new behaviours. So we're doing more than we should be doing, and we're not focusing on the right things. So that's one of the root causes. The second root cause, and it comes back to your question, Ingrid, around leadership. Yeah. There are changing demands on leadership. And if I start to think about the skills and the capabilities that are now needed for the leaders in the current environment, I would have to say emotional intelligence tops the chart. And in fact, it's even more important than the ability to have accountability conversations. Right. Because if we can't connect with people within our teams and make them feel valued and seen and heard and recognised, and there's nothing new here, this has always been a challenge, but if we can't do that effectively, it's very hard to have an accountability conversation that's constructive. It will come across as bullying, it will come across as being unempathetic, it will come across as being too harsh. And with the change in legislation, particularly in Australia, and I know a lot of countries around the world already have this legislation, psychosocial safety in the workplace is absolutely paramount. And it's the responsibility of leaders to make sure people feel safe and not harassed and not bullied. And that's absolutely wonderful. That's the way that it should be. But it means that for leaders, we need to have the emotional intelligence to be able to read the room, understand that we can't engage with everybody in the same way. Yeah. We may get away with being really direct with some of our people, but with others, that approach isn't going to work. So EQ, or emotional intelligence, is absolutely number one right now.
Absolutely. So, gosh, it makes so much sense. That lack of role clarity, that role compression, I think a lot of people can really relate to that. And so the ability of leaders to have high levels of EQ to create psychosocial safety and having gears to the way that they lead, so that it's not a one-size-fits-all, which sounds like, well, of course it's not going to be, Ingrid. Of course we know that. But knowing and being able to do a very different ideas, really. And I just think that when we've got so much pressure, and leaders are no exception to this, perhaps even more pressure on leaders these days, when leaders are under so much pressure to get results in a in a harder economic environment with even more ER and IR pressures,
Yes.
whether that's even just a perception or whether that is reality, but it's there.
Yes.
And then to be able to, go, okay, who's in front of me? How do I build this relationship of trust so that I can have an authentic conversation that is about accountability in a way that this person receives it in the way that I intend it, which is about maximum compassion, maximum care.
Absolutely, and supporting them to get better. So
Right.
many of your listeners will have heard of the radical candor framework. So if they haven't, it's a book written by Kim Scott, and she talks about challenging directly while caring deeply. And I think that really captures how we need to be having accountability conversations. So since the start of time, human beings will tend to avoid conflict, and subsequently many managers will procrastinate over what they perceive to be a sensitive or a difficult conversation. And subsequently, we're not particularly good at it. And my personal view is that the frameworks around accountability that sit in a lot of organisations don't support this well. So the annual performance review is a pretty scary conversation. What we should be doing is having regular, meaningful conversations about the things that matter with our team members and employees all the time, in some cases on a daily basis, so that we can deal with issues when they're small, but more importantly, we're confronting or challenging issues because we want to help people get better and we want to improve. And they know that that's our intention, and hence we've got a feedback-rich culture that enables everybody to flourish.
Wow. Absolutely. Just pause there. There's somebody. Just check if someone's at my front door.
Yeah,
I'm so
okay.
sorry.
That's
I'm not
okay.
expecting. I'm not expecting someone. Sorry, Trudy. Of course, that'll be all edited out. Sorry, I thought someone.
It's the beauty of doing it like this.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm used to doing it live, so this is good.
Okay, great. Okay. So, oh gosh, I could speak to you forever. That is absolutely phenomenal. Okay. So let's now talk about a recent conversation you and I had about the emergence of Gen Z into the workplace and by extension into the economy, because they're also not only going to be an employee, but they're going to be a customer.
Yes.
So from the research that you've read and are also undertaking, what are some of the standout features of this generation?
I think in many ways they've been misunderstood, and let me put some context around that. I think that the common perception for Gen Z is that their focus is doing purposeful, meaningful work, and it's all about saving the world, and ESG is really important to them, and it absolutely is. However, what's happened in the past few years, the research is showing that their mindsets have actually shifted, and the mindsets have shifted inward to themselves. So what I think we've got to recognise is, even though all of those things continue to be important to them, and hence it's really an important part of the employee value proposition and how you can attract them and retain them within your organisations, they've entered the workforce where many countries are in a recession, where job security is actually their focus. There's many redundancies happening at the moment, and there's downsizing. So even though the term that describes the current stage that we're in is the Great Exhaustion, what's predicted is the Great Stay is coming early next year, where people are really going to lock down and go, you know what, job security is my priority right now. They've shifted away from those macro concepts to focusing on job security, and even though they're digital natives, they were born with a phone in their hand, they're actually worried about how AI particularly is going to be taking a lot of the entry-level jobs that they would usually go into as they move through their education and enter the workforce. So I think that's one thing to really recognise with them. They're currently more self-interested than they are from a broader context, albeit I suspect that will shift back once things start to stabilise. The other thing that's interesting, and if I talk about attracting them and retaining them, they are digital natives. So there's a tremendous opportunity for organisations to embrace the mindset and their openness to change, and even look at upward mentoring programs where they can drive really purposeful initiatives within your organisations and be champions of change. Because that's, again, one of the skills that leaders need in this current environment. How do we drive an accelerated pace of change? It is not going to slow down. And in fact, if we want to continue to differentiate ourselves, we need to learn how to embed change effectively. And then the other thing with Gen Z, I think, is they've also been brought up in an environment where it is expected that you've got an entrepreneurial mindset. So they've grown up where everyone's got a side gig, whether that be being an Uber driver or setting up your own business on the side. They've possibly grown up with parents who are running their own businesses more and more. And they all want to be entrepreneurs, and they want to be wealthy tomorrow as well. That's the other part of it. However, that's not possible for everybody, as we know. So in an organisation, if you're looking to attract and retain Gen Z, one of the things that can be really compelling to them is intrapreneurship. So specifically, how do we create opportunities for them to tap into that entrepreneurial spirit within the context of your organisation? And looking at things such as multi-generational project teams. So rather than waiting until you're a senior manager to get involved in strategy, let's get you involved from day one as a graduate, but you're part of a cross-functional team where you're injecting your insights and your knowledge and they're valued rather than waiting to move through quite a linear hierarchy.
Well, that's so exciting to me. I think after I had my conversation with you, and then I've seen some other things about Gen Z and, you know, some of that research that you sent to me, I thought, I think I've got a little crush on Gen Z. I really think that they're a breath of fresh air, frankly.
Absolutely.
But so, I mean, that all sounds very exciting for an organisation, but an organisation that perhaps, well, so today's organisations, I would imagine, probably need to have a really good look at the way that they're structured in order to be ready to embrace Gen Z and to maximise the benefit that they can really bring. What are some of those changes that you think that an organisation might need to make in order to, I mean, it's all there.
Yeah.
But what's the shift that they need to make in order to embrace them?
Yeah. So there's a few really practical things. So if I think for a moment about career pathways and career progression, particularly for many larger organisations, there may be a very structured linear approach to progression. And if you think about any professional services firms, they will have often a partnership model, and there'll be a path to partnership, and often that's based on how many years it's going to take you to get relevant experiences to get to that level. Gen Z don't have the patience for that. And in fact, if they feel as though they're contributing value and they've got the capabilities, if they're not getting rewarded for that, and when I talk about reward, it would be through increased responsibility and making sure they've got a voice, and often that leads to increased remuneration, then they will go elsewhere. So I think one of the key things is rethinking the path to seniority. And the example I like to use is, somebody may say, look, I've got 6 years experience, and they're going to look really good on paper, versus somebody who's got 2 years experience. The person with 2 years experience may have had an accelerated pathway, and that experience could be incrementally more valuable than somebody who's had the same year experience repeated 6 times, and hence they've had 6 years experience. So I heard recently that in Canada, they've just changed the legislation so that no longer can employers advertise how many years experience somebody must have on a job ad. They actually need to look for the capabilities and the skills people have got. So I think that shift in mindset and not letting age be a barrier is really critical, because Gen Z, not only are they impatient, I think the shift is they know how to learn. Everything we want to know is on the internet. And with generative AI, it's making it easier and easier to learn. So if you've got people with the right attitude and the ability to learn and the right mindset, there's nothing stopping them progressing incredibly quickly. And if we can't deliver on that for them in a meaningful way, they'll either set up their own business or they'll go somewhere where they can do that. So that would be one of the shifts. I think the other shift, and there's nothing new here, and this actually applies to all generations, but with Gen Z, there's a spotlight on it, is that they want to be seen and they want to be heard. So thinking about how we structure our organisations, and specifically moving away from bureaucratic hierarchies where you don't have a voice and you're constantly pushing things up for approval, and then you might wait weeks until something comes back, to really empowering our younger generations to have a voice, to know how decisions can get made quickly. And possibly that may even mean re-looking at our organisational structures, potentially moving back to what's called a lattice model, where you've got self-directed teams. I'm a true believer that you still need somebody who's ultimately holding you accountable. However, we need to shift cultures so that accountability is happening at all levels, and accountability is part of our cultural DNA. We give feedback constantly at all levels, upwards, downwards, sideways, and subsequently we can really empower people to make decisions quickly and really support them to do a great job.
Yeah, absolutely, which I think, again, comes back to that EQ, because, if we're going to, and so I would imagine a leader needs to be modelling that EQ, and that be imbued throughout the substance of a culture, so that everyone can give and take really good quality feedback, so that everyone's personally accountable,
yes,
but mutually responsible as well to one another. And you talk about, organisations really thinking about their structures, and everything really from what I'm hearing, from the way that we recruit right through to those career pathways. Is it fair to say that organisations will increasingly need to be flexible enough to gear a pathway around an individual?
Absolutely. And if I look at some of the narrative globally around employee value proposition and what organisations are doing to attract great people to come and work for them, where the shift has gone to is not just we want to help you live your best life, and that's where it was a year ago. So this is now the work-life balance. It's shifted to we want to know you as an individual, and we are going to craft an experience at our organisation that gets the best out of you. So it's becoming very individualised. And I think for small to medium-sized organisations, there's a wonderful opportunity to embrace that, because you've got the flexibility. It obviously becomes much more challenging to systemise that when you start to talk about very large organisations, and making sure that you've got the guardrails in place so that it's fair and equitable.
That's an interesting flip there, isn't it? That's an interesting flip that gives small and medium-sized organisations an advantage, for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So we talked a little bit earlier about the role of AI, and when I look at my, through the sales lens, and I see that I really believe that, AI has a fantastic opportunity to be had, in sales roles, in customer service, in lead generation even.
Yeah.
You were talking, though, before about some of those entry-level roles that Gen Z would go into to cut their teeth in corporate environments being taken by AI, and they're concerned about that. What are the skills that you see are going to become highly sought after, in an age of AI?
What's fascinating to me is if I start to think about those entry-level roles being removed, I immediately ask myself, well, what's the learning that comes from those roles? And a lot of the operational elements of the role is what will be automated through AI, and to some extent, some of the decision-making as well as it becomes more progressive. That element is highly trainable, and I think most people will get up to speed on that pretty quickly, and hence that's why it's becoming automated. So that's not really where the value is. So then I ask myself, what will entry level or entrance into the workforce miss out on if they're not going into those roles, and they need to step up to a higher level? And what I think they miss out on is, it comes back to EQ again. How do we relate and engage with other human beings in a way that we can collaborate effectively, where we can drive change initiatives, where we can influence others? And it's those more sophisticated skills that actually make us effective as professionals and as leaders. How do we present effectively so that we can bring people on the journey? They're the things that they may miss out on, some of that initial role modelling and mentoring just by being in the workplace. However, that opportunity is still there. So the way I like to think about it is the operational elements of the role will change. The low value work will be automated. So they will be able to contribute more value. However, I think as an organisation, the challenge we've got is, how do we put a real spotlight on what was traditionally called the soft skills, albeit they're not so soft? How do we put a spotlight on those interpersonal skills that will actually enable us to operate more effectively as a team and as an organisation? And that's where I spend so much of my time, whether it be with boards, all the way through to frontline leaders and managers. How do we engage? How do we collaborate so that we can make effective decisions? We can engage in the right conversations, whether that be accountability conversations or talking about difficult issues that are important to individuals, to get maximum productivity and performance out of everybody and help people fulfill their potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really important there. So let's just say I'm an organisation that really wants to embrace Gen Z, I'm highly motivated to craft an experience for them.
Yeah.
That, that they feel really excited by and really connected to, yes, committed to. But they've just left uni, for example, and they're still learning all of those different skills. How do I give them, what would an induction program need to look like? Like, let's take a salesperson. They're in their first sales role, and a lot of the AI stuff's being done.
Yeah.
How would I craft an induction program for a new salesperson that gave them that really clear pathway to all of the exciting things that they really want, but makes sure that they're not walking before they crawl,
yes,
that they're building all of those motor skills, to use that analogy, in order for them to not have other deficits down the track?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. So the first thing I'd say is your induction or your onboarding program does not last 2 days. It's beyond saying this is the bathroom and say hi to everyone. It's probably a 6-month program. You might even want to think about a 12-month program. And I think that's the first thing. So let's reframe induction as, this is day one of your development program, and this is going to continue for the rest of your career. That's the other mindset. So development doesn't stop. You never quite make it. We're always looking for the next thing. The second thing would be giving them clarity around what the career opportunities are. Now, this isn't just about promotion. It's actually about the concept of building capabilities and skills that will set you up for success regardless of where your career takes you. Because I think if you ask most school-aged children what they want to do, Many of them have got no idea, and you even ask individuals when they come out of university what they want to do, they don't really know. And then you ask us, and we probably still don't know either, right? So it's going to evolve over time. So I think it's a conversation around helping them understand the capabilities that they will need to build to be successful, and how they will, through acquiring those, shape the different career opportunities that they have, either with your organisation or somewhere else. And I think that's a really important conversation, that we are supporting you as a human being, not you as an employee of this business. Wow. Because once you start to get that dialogue happening, it's the principle of reciprocity. You do something for me, I'm going to do a whole lot back for you, and you're going to get commitment and buy-in, etc. So that would be the first thing. So what that means for organisations is we need to put some thought into this. So things such as capability frameworks. What are the capabilities required to be a sales rep versus a sales manager versus a sales leader? They're not the same, as we know. But then you may have somebody who's in sales who decides they want to go into marketing, or they want to go into finance. So how do those capabilities transfer, and what are the options? So that would be step number one. Give them the path. The second thing that I'd recommend is set up a very clear accountability framework, and they need to understand that. So what I'm talking about now is clarity of expectations, transparency around performance. You don't want individuals guessing how they're performing. And what the research would tend to tell us is our high performers will tend to feel that they're not performing so well, and our poor performers will think they're doing a fantastic job. So you've got a real issue there. So how do we get clarity around what great looks like? How do we create regular feedback loops and transparency around how individuals are tracking? Because if you can get that right, you can embed accountability from day one. And it's this concept that accountability is not punishment if it's done well. In fact, it's one of the most motivating things you can do for people. Set clear goals, support them to achieve the goals, enable them to celebrate and be recognised for achieving goals. It's what makes us tick as human beings. So setting up that framework from the start, so there's regular feedback loops, and as part of that, we should be introducing these high empathy, high care conversations to check in and say, what are you enjoying about your work? What are you least enjoying about your work? How can I support you? How are you feeling at the moment? So these are the softer conversations that are absolutely critical to build that authentic trust. Now, separate to that, very operationally, there'll be a whole range of technical capabilities and skills that individual needs to learn and know, understanding the market, etc. So the important thing there is having a roadmap so they can see what's ahead of them, they can see the journey, and they can start to progress through that journey in a very structured way. Where people get disengaged and where they tend to leave because they don't feel as though they're being developed is because they can't see what's ahead. So that's back on us as leaders to have the framework, have the structure, and then it's how we engage individuals in that will make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine having multiple mentors, internally, and also, maybe identifying other mentors outside of the organisation too, that are going to foster and enable that person to be able to see what's possible and what might be next for them. And
absolutely. So that can be a really critical component, as can peer learning. So what will create the stickiness within organisations is having other like-minded people that they're getting value from. So how do we create really constructive groups where other Gen Zs can come together, where there's that sense of connection, we're like each other, but they're learning from each other. However, don't isolate them from the other generations. And in fact, creating strategic projects and getting them involved in those almost as a side gig, where you've got cross-functional teams, you've got cross-generational employees coming together, one of the most valuable things you can do. So much learning happens through just osmosis and being part of that, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
That's going to be a real challenge, I would imagine, for a lot of organisations, is managing multi-generational workforces now. So, okay. So we've talked a lot about about Gen Z, and like I said to you before, I think that it's a really important level of awareness for organisations to be able to attract and retain them. What about, at the moment we're hearing from organisations that are just so worried about retaining talent, by not having the deepest pockets.
Yeah.
But actually, what's the research telling us that we can do instead, not just for creating a sense of belonging with, Gen Z employees and customers, but across the generations?
Yeah. So we went through a period about a year ago where there were silly amounts of money being thrown around to attract talent, and many of those organisations are now paying the price of that, which means that they've overpaid people. And for those businesses who are dealing with the outcome of a tough economic environment, there's been a lot of redundancies happening, and we know who goes first in those situations. So I think as an aside, but it's an important aside, to ensure that organisations have a really good remuneration strategy and framework in place. And where you don't have deep pockets, where a lot of organisations have started to move, is towards having greater weighting on variable remuneration, even for non-sales roles, so that there's shared risk. So the principle there is we want to pay people fairly relative to the market, and that means we need to be doing salary benchmarking to understand what that actually looks like. However, in a talent market where there's a lot of competition, you can be paying a whole lot more, or there can be the promise of being paid a whole lot more. However, it's tied to performance. So it's a win-win situation. If the individual performs and the organisation performs, in fact, you can pay them, in theory, almost any amount of money if it's modelled correctly. But getting that modelling correct is important. My team and I get called in to clean up a lot of disastrous incentive schemes that are not aligned. So that's an aside. Now, once you've got the money right, I think the really important thing is, and this comes back to the individualisation, is having conversations with job applicants and even your employees. We shouldn't really separate the two, to understand what their personal goals are and understand what their professional goals are. Now, often we're really good at talking about professional goals, but historically we haven't really spoken about personal goals. The trick is, if you can open up that conversation and really understand what motivates somebody at this stage of their life, and then create a connection between what's personally meaningful to them and what the workplace can offer, you've got them. And in fact, money won't be an issue anymore. So let me give you an example. You might have somebody who's got a young family, and when you ask them about their personal goals, they'll say, look, money is important because I've got a mortgage and interest rates are going up, etc., 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 etc. So having the opportunity to earn more money through variable remuneration is something that's really of interest to me. However, what's also really important to me is my family. And I've got young children right now. In fact, my personal goal and my dream would be to coach my daughter's football team. And if I could coach my daughter's football team, that would be amazing. That's been something I've always dreamt of doing. If you can get that kind of information out of individuals, it is gold, because then you can ask yourself, what would it take to make that available for you? And it may be as simple as, during the winter months, when it's football season, that person leaves work at 3:00 so they can coach their daughter's football team. You have got an incredibly satisfied, happy person who's then going to give you a whole lot of discretionary effort. They'll probably be your top performer. And in this current age of flexible work arrangements, there's no reason why we can't do that.
That's powerful. I mean, if we were talking about customers and what salespeople need to do in order to, retain a really good customer, I would be saying the same thing. And it comes down to relevance. What's most important to you, or what really matters to you in the next year, 2 years, 5 years? What are the things that you hold dear to you personally as well as professionally?
Yes.
Coming back to that whole person, reality that we live in now, and then aligning the way that I deliver value to you as an employer or as an organisation in the same way that I would if I was a good salesperson to my customer. Because when there's relevance there, that's what people see as valuable. I mean, you can have a great product.
Yes.
But if, I mean, it might be a great salary, but like you said, if that person really wants to coach their child's football
Yes.
team, and it's great money, but that's actually, a really high goal for them, and they have to make a decision, we all know that the decision that they make will probably be a little bit of sacrifice over here in order to have that need met over here. And when we're in in that environment where we really want to make sure that we're keeping the best people, we need to have that. But it comes back to, again, expectations, because you can have that on one hand, but without being clear about the expectation in exchange for all of that.
That's right.
That's where it can fall down, isn't it?
Yeah. So a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is and this comes back to the empathy, accountability balance, is
Right.
helping organisations re-establish accountability frameworks within their organisation. So at a very high level, what that looks like is, number one, well, transparency is probably the overriding theme, actually. So number one, I know what I'm accountable for. Regardless of any flexibility that I've got, I'm being held accountable for the outcomes, including behaviours. So it's not just hard metrics. Number two, I know what everyone else is accountable for in my team. Number three, we all know how each other is performing relative to those accountabilities. It's a regular conversation that's high support and high challenge. And that might be happening on a daily or on a weekly basis. How am I tracking? And making sure that everyone feels safe enough to say, you know what, I'm struggling with this for the following reasons. Can I get some help, or can I get some ideas? If you can create that kind of culture, you can give your people as much flexibility as they want, because at the end of the day, they will hold each other accountable, and they will want to be accountable because they're getting so much in return. And it becomes very obvious to the rest of the team if the accountability side of the equation is missing, and they won't last.
Extraordinary. Trudy, I could keep you here for the next 10 years, I think, and still be asking you more questions, but I won't.
Thank you.
I might have you back another time, but where can people find you to either book you for a keynote or to invite you in to help them navigate this very challenging landscape?
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid. So probably the best place is our website. So that's www.talentcodehr.com.au, or you can also find me on LinkedIn, so Trudy MacDonald. And we've also got a YouTube channel. And in fact, on the YouTube channel, there's a whole lot of short videos, literally hundreds of them, with really practical tips around things that leaders can do. So if you just search for Talent Code HR on YouTube, you'll be able to find us there as well. But please don't hesitate to reach out. As Ingrid mentioned, I have a lot of experience doing keynotes and conferences, and one of the things I really enjoy, and it's a privilege, is leaving leaders with really practical tips and takeaways, things that they can take right back to their teams.
Well, you've certainly delivered in spades today, Trudy. It's been an absolute privilege to have you here, and I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's a pleasure. Thank you.